never, ever underestimate the number of people who want, who need, and who are willing to pay for good financial advice.
Welcome to Breaking Money Silence, a podcast series aimed at helping all of us talk more openly about money. Your host, Kathleen Kingsbury, is a wealth psychology expert who is doing what she does best, speaking about taboo topics. International speaker, author, and founder of KBK Wealth Connection, Kathleen understands money and our relationship with it. Now, here is Kathleen.
Welcome to the Unleash Your True Value podcast series. I am your host, Kathleen Kingsbury. In this series, we will be discussing how to identify and communicate your value as a female financial advisor. Why? Because it's important for you to stand in your true value, charge what you're worth, and feel really great about it. Now, women advisors are in demand, but progress in achieving equality in the field certainly has been slow. If you're a female advisor, chances are you've encountered challenges working in a predominantly male industry. In this series, I will break money silence and talk about the gender disparities in the field, from the lack of advancement for women into leadership roles to the persistent gender wage gap. The goal of this series is to move the conversation forward, to offer solutions so that together we can change the face of wealth management. Does that sound good? If so, then make sure you subscribe to the podcast on your favorite podcast app and that you share each and every episode of the Unleash Your True Value podcast series with your network and your community. So let's get this conversation started. Here is this week's guest. I'm Kathleen Kingsbury, and welcome to the Breaking Money Silence podcast. We are doing a special series on unleashing your true value, and I am very pumped to have our guest that we're having today on to talk about, as a female advisor, how you can advocate for yourself and how you can know your value. So Kathleen Godfrey is an independent registered investment advisor. She is the founder of her own firm called Godfrey Financial, which is deeply committed to her capital region area, which is where she practices. And she has a policy of giving back to her company. She also believes in transparency and helping people get a peace of mind in a crazy, complex financial world. Kathleen and I met gonna say about 17 years ago at a Women in Insurance and Financial Services conference in Boston. We hit it off and we have managed to stay in contact ever since. And she was nice enough to come and share her wisdom on the podcast today. Welcome, Kathleen.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Yes, I am so excited to talk to you about advocating for yourself in this career. And one of the places I want to start is, you're a woman, you've been in this career 27 years. Do you think this career is a good career for women? And if so, why?
It's absolutely a great career for women. It is the only career that I know of where there's absolutely no glass ceiling. You can earn as much as you want. You have a lot of flexibility, much more than most other careers. You're not, it's not a 9 to 5 where you're clocking in, clocking out. And if you know some different angles to work, you can really do well for yourself. I have never regretted this career. My only regret actually is that I didn't start 10 years earlier. That's the truth.
And so what would have been different 10 years earlier? Would it just have been where you were able to grow your business, or is there something else to that 10
Well,
years?
I would have recognized that I have a lot to offer. And I was, my prior career, I was a senior budget analyst for the state of New York. And I was working with municipal finance. I'm a little bit of a nerd, and I love the finance. I've always worked with money my whole professional career. But I was told, and Kathleen, you can't make this stuff up, I was told that I was too ambitious.
Really?
And, oh yeah.
Huh.
And, I was working really hard. I was trying to make a difference. And then I got downsized, and I thought, okay, where can I go and work where ambition will not be punished? And I'll be honest, it was a real short list.
Well,
And
27 years ago, absolutely. And even today, unfortunately, I think it's a short list.
yeah, there are not a lot of, well, let me rephrase that. There are certain businesses where being ambitious is not rewarded. It's not, it's frowned upon, actually. And even in the 21st century, some companies still expect women to have a place and to stay in place.
What's so interesting, and you just is a flashback to the beginning of my career, and I can remember working as an FDIC bank examiner, and one of the first things they taught you, and this is, maybe not true today, but when I was in that particular region at that particular time, was you just fall into line. Like, don't be too ambitious was the message. And I didn't really understand at the time. I just knew that I was supposed to go with the flow and not
Yes.
stand out. So, and, I was naive. I was a young woman. I was naive. I never even thought about that as a gender difference. But do you think men get the same message to not be too ambitious?
Oh, not at all. They get a completely different message. And if you go back to when we were children, okay, go back to your childhood, girls and boys are raised differently. Girls are taught and rewarded for being careful. Boys are rewarded for taking risks. So when we become adults with those internal messages, a lot of times women will fall in line because that's what they've been trained to do since they were girls. And boys will go out on a limb, and men, and there's a lot of research to back this up. Most men are hired based on their potential. Most women are hired based on their track record. So women are not even hired based on their potential, which is a shame. There is a double standard. It still exists, even in 2024.
Yeah. And one of the ways in which we reconnected recently was I started to really pay attention to how vocal you were being on social media about specifically the differences in how women advisors practiced versus traditional male advisors.
Hmm.
So, what makes you so passionate about speaking the truth about these gender disparities? Because I know there are some people in the field on either sides that kind of tiptoe around the issue, but not you, Kathleen. Could be the name. Could be the name.
Well, just looking at the demographic data, women live longer than men on average. They outlive their spouses. So I have outlived a spouse already. Um, and women are widowed, they become divorced, and they're single by choice. And the training that the majority of male advisors receive is that in a family, the male is the breadwinner. The wife plays a secondary role. She may earn money, but she's not the primary breadwinner. When in fact, in almost half of heterosexual marriages, almost half of the women are the primary breadwinner. If you look at the kind of training that's going on even now in financial firms, this is how male advisors are trained. And when they come in contact with women who don't fit that mold, it's a little unsettling sometimes. And they
Yeah,
don't quite know how to deal with it.
yeah. I mean, I've spent a large part of my career trying to educate primarily male advisors about how to be more effective and connect with different demographics of women. But I'm curious, when you say male advisors get a different type of training, do you think as a woman you receive the same training and filtered
Yes.
it differently? Oh, okay. So
No,
say a little bit more about how it's different.
women in the industry, when they're being trained, a lot of them they go to the training and they're almost in disbelief. Like, what? What? What do you mean? They don't really quite know how to handle it. Number one. Number two, There's so many things that go on in the financial world. So I'll give you a very concrete example. In a lot of financial companies, not just one or two, but this is pretty prevalent, there'll be like a mandatory sales training every Monday morning at 8 a.m. Well, if you're a mom getting your kids on the school bus at 8 a.m., you're probably going to be late for that meeting, or you might miss it altogether. And in the Northeast, when it snows, sometimes school delays and school closings. If you keep coming late to those meetings, it sends a message to your colleagues that maybe you're not as serious as they are. And instead of changing the mandatory 8 a.m. sales meeting to maybe 10 a.m. or a lunchtime meeting, nope, 8 a.m. That's it. It's carved in stone. We're not changing. And a lot of women who start in the industry don't make it because they can't juggle this. Now, I said in the very beginning that there's a lot of flexibility. There's a lot of flexibility if you know how to work the system. And you have to be able to say to your supervisor or your branch manager, I can't make an 8 o'clock meeting. Would you be willing to reconsider? Maybe make it 9 o'clock. But we are trained, like I said, from a very early age to follow rules, color inside the lines, be careful. And a lot of women, they don't speak up until they're so mad that they're ready to walk out the door. And it's unfortunate. And it's just these little things like having mandatory sales meetings at 8 in the morning that it becomes disillusioning and disheartening. And it's unfortunate because I think a lot of companies are missing out on great talent just because of these little things that can be easily remedied.
And often I find if I'm working with a male leader and that individual kind of has a blind spot around why is that a problem, as opposed to just listening and saying, well, it is a problem for one of my staff members, so we're going to change it.
Hmm.
And that can really, I see what you're saying. Those little things can really chip away at someone feeling like the environment is supportive of them and their family and of their business goals. Now, for you, you've probably had to deal with a bunch of that over more than 2 decades. So what allowed you to be successful in a predominantly male financial services industry? Because that may give us some tips as to the types of women that might do well going forward.
Right. Well, having been widowed myself, having been divorced also, neither one of those events is I would never wish either of those on anybody. But the truth is, most of us women are going to if we're married, we'll outlive our spouses. That's just the reality. And coming from that mindset into this industry, um, there were people who didn't really quite know what to do with me or what to say to me. I had to find my own mentors. I had to find people who would believe in me. I had naysayers like you can't believe. They were this one guy literally said to me, if he said it once, he said it 50 times. You'll never make it, Godfrey. You'll never make it. You don't know what you're doing. Why don't you come and work for me? I'll show you how it's done. Well, coming to work for him would have meant he would have taken 20 or 30% of my revenue.
I think he was threatened by you because he
I think
wanted, yeah, he
I
wanted
think
that
maybe he
revenue.
was.
Yeah.
And so every time I saw him, and his name was Frank, and every time I saw Frank, he would say, "You'll never make it. Come and work for me. I'll show you how it's done." And I would say very politely, "No, thank you. I'm going to figure it out." And my first 3 years in business were, let's just say I operated in the red for a couple of years because it did take me a while to figure it out. It took a lot of meetings with prospective clients. I had to hear no a lot. Eventually, I got a little more confident in what I was able to offer. And by the 4th year, I was operating in the black. And the problem with that is if you're a single mom, you might not be able to afford to be operating in the red for 3 years. And it's pretty scary when you've got kids, when you've got a mortgage, and it's so important to find mentors as soon as possible. There were a number of men who did believe in me, who did help me get a hand up, not a hand out, a hand up. But what I found was I had to find other women in the financial services industry. There weren't a lot of us. And I did find a trade association, WIFS, and I got involved with that. And I met other women like myself all over the country who shared, guess what? The same stories.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I became determined to make this work because I knew it was a fit for me, for my skills and my moxie and my gumption. I knew I could help people. I just needed to get out there and do it. So the third year, I went to see my accountant, and I brought all my paperwork, and she looked it over, and she looked at me and said, "Kathleen, I only have one question. Is this a business or is this a hobby?"
Ooh, ouch.
And that's what I said. "What?" And she said, "How many years are we going to go to the IRS with a negative number?" And I remember I cried all the way home. I was
Yep.
so angry. And all I could think about were 3 words: "I'll show her. I'll show her." And I don't know, she lit a fire under me, and I was determined that when I went back the next year, I was not going to be in the red. And I just started, I don't know, dropping off or like losing my inhibitions and approaching people and pitching myself more effectively and making phone calls and going to networking events and meeting people. And it was almost as though the lid came off of the box and out came this woman who was not going to stop and was not going to back down. And when I went to drop off my tax information that 4th year, she looked at it and she said, "Wow, I'm going to have to call you give me a week." And she did. She called me a week later. She said, "Are you sitting down? I've
Love
got
this.
good news and bad news."
Yeah.
She said, "The good news is, holy cow, you did great. What happened?" I said, You happened. You made me so mad that I was determined not to come to you with negative numbers. And she said, "Well, I'm glad you're sitting down because here's how much you owe the
Yeah,
IRS."
exactly.
And I remember this was way before e-filing. And I remember standing in line at the post office with my tax return and my check. And I felt so proud. And of course, the next day, the thrill was gone because I went, "Oh my God, I've got to pay taxes. I should start eating my own cooking." And that's when I incorporated and I started, doing things a little differently. But that's my humble beginnings. And for somebody who doesn't have a mentor or doesn't have a support system and is trying, it's really frightening. It's really frightening. You go, "Oh my God, how am I going to make the rent this month? How am I going to put food on the table?" And I don't know. I just kept going and kept going because I knew that this was the career for me. And I knew I could help people. I knew I could help women make better decisions.
Well, I hear a couple of things when I think about kind of what helped you be successful, a variety of things actually, but determination, you used the word moxie. You also really, really wanted to help other women. And there was a part of you that I can see over the course of time where someone tells you you can't do it. And I'm laughing because I'm the same way. You're like, "You bet I can do it."
Yeah.
So you kind of, you rose to those challenges. And so both Frank giving you a hard time and this tax person just kind of telling you like it was really helped you to communicate that value. Now, we all know, both you and I and the people listening in, that if you are a female advisor or any advisor actually in this industry, you need to be able to clearly and confidently communicate your value to prospects. That is not an easy thing to do. Also, if you're listening in and say you're a coach or consultant, you need to do the same thing. It's a similar skill. But for you, it sounds like in the beginning you struggled, but something clicked that fourth year for you.
Hmm.
So looking back, what in addition to the accountant kind of challenging you helped you overcome the roadblock of clearly communicating your value?
Well, I had to figure out what the value was. And once I could articulate it, I could share it. And for me, it was helping people get their financial house in perfect order and keep it that way. And I had a mentor who said to me, never, ever underestimate the number of people who want, who need, and who are willing to pay for good financial advice. And if you look at the United States, even now in the 21st century, we are a nation of financial illiterates.
I know.
Nobody teaches us about money at any stage of the educational system. And we don't know what we're doing. And sometimes we realize that we don't know what we're doing much too late in the game. So when somebody's turning 50 and they figure out, holy cow, I better start saving for retirement. Well, that's pretty late in the game to get started. We need to have conversations with our children and teach our children how money works. I remember getting my first credit card when I was a college student. Credit card companies used to come to campus, and when you're 20,
Oh, yeah.
18, 19, 20
The
years
good
old,
80s.
you're not thinking about the fine print or reading the fine print. All of a sudden, somebody says, "Here you go. Here's a credit card that you can spend $2,500." And it's almost like, wow, you've been a poor student for so many years, and then you spend $2,500, and then all of a sudden you get an invoice. You start getting the bills and the statements, and you go, oh, uh-oh, I have to pay this back. Well, wait a minute, I'm in college. I don't have a job yet. And then the reality hits you for the first time. And there's so many people in this country who have so much debt and they don't know how to manage their money. And it's not because they're stupid people. They're not stupid people. It's just that money brings out the best in us and the worst in us, and it causes a great deal of stress and anxiety. So, if I can help somebody get their financial house in perfect order and keep it that way, I feel like I've done a great service to that person and to all the lives that they touch.
Well, and what is interesting, Kathleen, when I listen to you talk about your value, that you're talking in general about the value, but also it ties to what is important to you, which is this being of service. I see this in how you've talked about it today. I see it in your bio of all the charitable organizations that you serve. And so the reason I'm highlighting that is I think for people listening in, one of the keys is identifying your value, but being able to tie it to what you're passionate about, what you actually value, and then being able to communicate that clearly. And that takes some time and energy. You mentioned, it taking a couple of years. You also mentioned a couple of different mentors. And so I know now you mentor women advisors as a way of paying it forward. And you must believe this can change the trajectory of somebody's career. So, what impact do you think mentorship has on women being able to advocate and know their value? And how can somebody out there find a good mentor if indeed this is something that they want to do?
Well, that's a great question. I met a woman in, I think it was 2007, at a WIFS conference, and she approached me and asked me if I would consider mentoring her. And I agreed, and we spoke on the phone. Oh my gosh, I think it was every 2 weeks for about a year. When we started, she was ready to give up. She was ready to pack it in and do something else with her life. And I was pretty candid with her. I yelled at her a lot, and not screaming and yelling or anything, but she would tell me that things that she was doing, and I'd say, "Why are you doing that? Stop doing that." And I would give her practical advice based on my own experience. And this was stuff that she was not going to learn from her training department. And she started listening and changing the way she approached how she was doing the business. So fast forward a year later, she was, I think, number 10 in her company. She was like number 10 from the top
That's
of
awesome.
all. I mean, it was unbelievable. And I learned as much as she did. And one of the things that I kept reiterating for her was, you are going to change someone's life in a really profound way. And I had her take a Post-it note. And I said, I want you to write this down, and I want you to put this where you can see it all the time. And I learned this from a mentor. And I said, I want you to write the letters SW, 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 and then the word next. And she said, what does that mean? I said, well, some will, some won't. So what? Someone's waiting. Next. I said, because when you're speaking with prospective clients, they're kind of lagging behind. Oh yeah, I got to think about it. I'll call you back. Or, they'll give you any number of excuses because they don't want to say no because they're so polite. Just move on. Someone's waiting. Move on to the next person. There is someone out there who really needs you. And once you start believing that, and once you've seen the power of the work you can do with people and how you can profoundly change their lives, you're not going to settle for someone stringing you along any longer. And it's okay if somebody says no. You're not a perfect fit for everyone, but there is someone who's out there and they're waiting to meet you. And you just got to keep going. And with time and with practice, you begin to identify who's a good potential client for you. And you'll stop spending your time with people who are not good potential clients. I don't know if that makes sense, but
It
this isn't.
absolutely makes sense. And I think when you're talking about mentoring, and in this particular situation, it's like there's part of her wanted to hear that truth. It's kind of almost like you were her accountant, so to speak, of telling her, this is the time, make it or break it. But there is a way in which having somebody in your corner, whether it's a mentor like yourself, a woman advisor to woman advisor, it could be that it is a coach like I have a mentor coaching group. And so we come together and do something similar in a group format. It could be that there's something internal at your firm. It's a variety of places, but I have found that I'm in the business that I'm in and I'm successful because I had mentors and coaches and people around me supporting me, but also pushing me. And it sounds like that's what you do for the women that come into your life.
Yes, yes. And there is someone waiting for you. There is. And never underestimate the number of people who want and need and are willing to pay for good advice, because it's hard to find good advice. It's easy to find people who will try to sell you something, but financial planning as I don't want to say a commodity, but as a service, it's great to sell somebody, have them sign up for a retirement plan. But if you haven't helped them with their cash flow, so they're not going to be successful. You have to set people up for success. And my experience with women in the financial services industry is that the industry itself does not set women up for success. They talk a good game. They'll talk about how they want a diverse workforce, but at the end of the day, they're still having those mandatory 8 a.m. sales meetings, and they won't budge from that. And it's those little insidious things that are keeping women from really making it big time in this industry. Now, having said that, there are many, many very successful women in this industry, but most of them, I would venture to say, have figured it out on their own, and have made it happen regardless of the roadblocks that are thrown in their way.
They've had to use a big dose of Moxie. part
Yes.
of part of what I'm working on in my business in 2024 and going forward, and part of what this series is about, is really figuring out how can we make it so women not only have the moxie and the support. That's one aspect of what I'm doing, but the other aspect is how do we get there internally and really help to shift that culture? That's a bigger ask, and something that I'm trying to work with wealth management firms on, because this has been going on far, far too long.
From
And
the beginning of time.
yes, and I do see it shifting and changing a little, but it's been so slow that I can only imagine, because I'm an external consultant, so there's a way in which I can step out and take a break. Being in this industry and feeling as if, okay, we're saying we need more women, we're saying we need more people of color, we're saying we need more diversity, but then everything we're doing, like the 8 a.m. meeting, is saying, well, not really.
Yes.
So it kind of spins your head a bit.
Well, if you think about the financial industry itself, it was developed by men to serve men because they were the only ones who had money. Women were property. Women belonged to their fathers, and then when they got married, they belonged to their husbands. And they didn't have money. They weren't allowed to have money for so many years. And I would say maybe in the past 30, 40, 50 years, women have come into their own, but not even even less than that, maybe in the past 10 years. And I'm sure you've heard of the article that the Harvard Business Review put out 15 years ago, talking about the female economy
Yes.
and how women are controlling so much money, and yet the industry that gets the worst reviews across the board is the financial services industry. And, women don't want to be spoken down to. They also don't want to get, instead of an answer to their question, a 45-page Morningstar report. They don't want to hear sports analogies like, okay, this fund manager is batting 1,000, or we're at fourth down in inches. Some women don't know what that means. They don't want to go into an office where there are mounted deer heads and sports trophies. Just how about fresh flowers? How about have your assistant buy fresh flowers every week? Women notice those kinds of things. They want to feel welcome. And I meet women all the time who tell me that they left their advisor because they didn't feel like they were valuable to them. Even if they had a multi-million-dollar account, they never felt like the advisor really took the time to know them. And that once their husband passed away or they got divorced, they decided, I'm moving on. I'm finding somebody who's more aligned with my value system. And women are looking to work with women. Not all women, but once you've been through a life experience that's so jarring, sometimes you want to just sit down and have a cup of tea and maybe have a good cry. And I don't know that men are trained to be able to do that. That doesn't mean they can't. It doesn't mean they can't learn to be empathetic. But I think when you look at the industry as a whole, it's still run by women. If you
You mean
look at
run by men?
run by men, run by men.
That was
Sorry,
a nice Freudian slip, though. I
that
love
was
that.
a
Wouldn't
big
that be great?
Freudian slip. I mean, if you look at mutual funds, 99% of them are run by men. Does that mean women couldn't do it? Or like, what does that mean? I mean, the mutual funds that I use are run by women, and guess what? They do real well.
Well, and I
Um,
think what you're talking about is certainly there's all sorts of ways in which unconscious gender bias, blatant gender bias, there's a lot of things to contend with as a female client, but certainly as a woman advisor. And so
Absolutely.
I think, time goes so fast that we're going to need to wind this down today, but there's so many ideas you shared. I'm wondering if you could think about, and I know this is hard, but one piece of advice for women advisors listening in around how to communicate their value or how to know they're valuable or to work in making sure they hold their ground in this field. Because I feel like you've learned from the school of hard knocks.
Well, the one thing is to really in your DNA, in your gut, in your soul, is to really believe that what you have to offer matters. It matters a lot, and you can have a profound impact on a lot of people just by sharing your knowledge and by being that person that they want to come to, that they, you know, I have changed so many people's lives, and it's an honorable career. It's a fantastic career for women. It's just not set up really as a female-friendly kind of industry. And we've been leaning in. I heard Sally Krawcheck speak not too long ago, and she said we've been leaning in and leaning in and leaning in for a good long time now. And we've done our part. Now it's time for the industry to kind of wake up and stop paying lip service to the fact that they want a more diverse, more female friendly environment. They have to change how they're doing things.
I couldn't agree more. I couldn't agree more. Well, it's just so nice to hear a little bit about your story, about your mentorship, the fact that you rose above. And I think the biggest takeaway for me in talking with you is something that I coach on, but I can hear it in your voice, like deep in your bones, which is believing what you have to offer is valuable. And if each and every one of the women advisors out there or coaches and consultants could really believe in their impact, then it becomes easier and actually enjoyable, dare I say, to communicate your value, to sell more because you are doing it in service. And I find that that's an incredibly female-friendly approach. And so,
Yes.
Kathleen, tell us a little bit more about where people can find out more about your firm, more about any speaking that you're doing. Like, how do we stay in contact with you?
Well, you can find me on LinkedIn, and all of my contact information is there. My website is godfreyfinancial.com, and you can learn about me and my firm. We are a woman-owned and all-female advisory firm. We do have a great guy on our staff. He's our operations guy. I don't know if we could live without him at this point, but all of our advisors are women. And it just, we bring a different perspective to the table. Are we always the best fit? No. Are we always going to be right for you? No. But we have a different perspective that most of our clients find refreshing and extremely inspirational. And we do practice what we preach, and we have aligned our value system with the way we do business.
I love that. So definitely go to LinkedIn. You want to follow Kathleen just to follow her posts. They're fascinating.
Thank you.
And we will put all the social information and contact information in the show notes. I am so glad that I bumped into you 17 years ago at that conference.
Me too. Me too.
And we are still having the conversation. So thank you so much for breaking money silence with me today.
It's been a pleasure.
Thank you for listening to Breaking Money Silence, hosted by Kathleen Burns Kingsbury, a wealth psychology expert, author, and founder of KBK Wealth Connection. If you like what you heard today, be sure to subscribe on iTunes or your favorite podcast app and leave a review. Also, share this episode with your friends and family. It is a great way to get the conversation started. For more money talk tips and information, or to hire Kathleen to speak at your next event, go to www.breakingmoneysilence.com.